Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today for what is my second session of day one of our Risky Business 2023 event. Hope you found some real value in the sessions that you've attended already. I'm confident that this session should be equally informative, provide you with some information and hopefully some thought-provoking content regarding how you can make use of powerful data analytics to springboard your GRC investments into the next level. And also start to do more with less, harnessing the power of your supporting technology, making sense of the abundance of risk and controls related data that's out there and that exists within your many systems of record. At a time when organizations are being asked to up their game when it comes to transparency, reporting, disclosures related to how they manage risk and internal controls, and just as importantly, how they monitor the ongoing effectiveness and get that sort of continuous assurance, then data can and should play an integral part in this. Proposed changes to the UK Corporate Governance Code in supporting corporate governance reforms in the UK are currently shining a huge spotlight on these things right now, as well as the ongoing pressures to create greater levels of assurance, but at the same time achieving efficiency gains, i.e. doing more with less. This all points towards how important data analytics can be to your own organization. So to help drive this conversation and highlight exactly how data analytics can play a crucial role in all of this, I'm delighted to be joined by one of our strategic partners, Diligent, to provide their insights, provide some examples using their own analytics solution, as well as share stories of how some of their customers are taking advantage of these powerful analytics capabilities. Before we do some quick intros, though, and just in terms of timings, the session is going to run for 30 minutes. We've allowed approximately sort of 5 minutes at the end to answer any questions that you may have on the topic. So feel free to post those throughout the session using the Q&A function available on the platform. We'll tackle those at the end. So let's begin with some intros. So my name is Mark Jackson. I'm the RM Practice Director for Turnkey UK. And looking to use data to help inform on business risks and controls is something that we're seeing more and more with our own customers. So this is very topical. As I said, I'm delighted to be joined today by our partners Diligent, and in particular, Chris and Tom. So I'll hand over to them for some intros at this point. Shall we start with yourself, Chris?
Yep, very happy to. I'm very happy to be here, Mark. Chris Mills, I'm a regional director here at Diligent. I work very closely with a number of businesses across the UK, Ireland and Nordic regions, focused on a broad range of topics around GRC. One of those being the kind of hot topic that everyone wants to talk about at the moment, which is continuous assurance, data analytics around their program, and critically trying to harness data in a more meaningful way, as opposed to just sitting on piles of data lakes and other fun things.
Great, thanks, Chris. Over to you, Tom.
Yeah, hi everyone. Tom Ryan, Director of Solution Engineering for Diligent in Europe. I'm going to walk you through a few things today based on my experience working with audit teams, risk management teams and controls teams over the last number of years.
Great, thank you both. So I'm going to be quiet now, allow Chris and Tom to cover the really interesting stuff. So over to you guys. I believe you're going to share some content, Tom, to start with.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark. I will just very, very quickly provide some kind of brief background. But the interesting thing that we're going to do today is really get you into the system, so you can start looking at how some of these ideas and theories can come to life. And I think that's probably a really good critical opening point. Is that a lot of the time we're talking to customers and they love the idea of continuous controls monitoring or continuous risk monitoring, badged up as continuous assurance, which is how we kind of describe it. But along with that comes perceived challenges and access to various systems. And just being frank, these things are challenges. There is a lot of internal stakeholders that you need to engage with in order to kind of get these programs up, running, and critically successful. But we always implore customers to kind of explore those avenues, because the value that can be derived from automation in this space is significant, far more significant than maybe the time and effort investment that is required in order to start realizing success in this space. It's not something for every single business, because legacy systems are a real thing, and there is always a lowest common denominator that needs to be considered when it comes to getting these programs up and running. But certainly something that should be explored within your organizations. Data is a key component of all of our GRC programs across third, second, sort of first line. But using data effectively and having it work for you is the ultimate aim, right? Humans just are not able to process the amount of information that systems can, and we're kind of delighted to be able to share with you some examples of how you'd actually use data analytics within your business and fundamentally create that value for your company moving forwards. And with that, I'll kind of pass over to Tom to take us into the interesting bits, which is certainly a lot more pragmatic than me waffling on. So thanks, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. So today, for everybody, I'm going to walk us through something I call how to use data analytics, and I've put the emphasis on data analytics, on use there for data analytics, and Chris kind of referenced that as well. There's no point having a big data analytics program collecting lots of data and monitoring lots of stuff unless it's actually delivering value to our organization. And that value doesn't tend to be just in terms of statistics, metrics, and information, but that value tends to be in what does it actually mean as it relates to risk exposure, as it relates to control performance, and as it relates to assurance within our organization. So I'm going to walk you through some slides and interchangeably swap to showing the Diligent platform, and you'll get a feel then for how our discussions with customers tend to evolve and where they end up after they've started to implement and see value from their program. So the first area that we're going to think about is how do we use data analytics to communicate what matters when it matters. And really this boils down to trying to move away from traditional point-in-time risk and assurance reports to something that feels a lot more modern and actually brings risk and assurance teams into the modern world up to things that the rest of the business are already doing. So what we tend to hear then from our customers and senior stakeholders in those customers is that traditional point-in-time risk and assurance reports are not really providing value to board and senior management anymore. And what management and boards and committees are really asking for is real-time assurance and forward-looking assurance projections. And you can do that by combining the power of data analytics with dashboarding technology. And with that technology, you can really start to focus on communicating what matters when it matters in a way that's valuable, in a way that's data-driven, and most importantly, in a way that's directly actionable. And what we're doing here is actually combining the power of computers with the power of humans, because we're using the power of data analytics and data visualization with the interpretation skills of a human. So combining that information with a lot of narrative is really important when you're doing that. So you're providing then your stakeholders not with a 20, 30-page report that they need to look through every quarter, but with something they can check every day to easily take corrective actions, to easily remediate where needed, and really understand what's happening to our organization today, not what's happening to our organization 2 months ago, 3 months ago, or even 6 months ago in some cases. And I want to show you a practical example of where we've implemented that before. So I'm going to swap to my Diligent Boards portal here. So this is a portal that tends to be used by risk committees, boards, senior stakeholders to manage communication, to manage board meetings and that kind of thing within there. What a lot of our customers are now starting to take advantage of is the ability to push dashboards with data analytics inclusion out to those senior stakeholders on a near real time or on a scheduled basis, depending on what they're comfortable with. I've got an example here of one where we're looking at some IT risk or cyber risk information. And I think the first thing that you'll notice about this dashboard is where we are looking at both visualizations on the right-hand side and a lot of narrative inclusion on the left. And the idea is then that I was talking about is using those visualizations and that data to communicate what matters when it matters, but also using the things that humans are good at, that narrative inclusion, to really educate and inform our audience on what that data means. And you'll see that using data analytics, I've got information that's coming from within my organization. That might be information related to ISO 27001 controls, for example, combined with data that's coming from outside of my organization using trusted sources. And I think people often overlook that as a valuable point that can be used for a data analytics program. Here, for example, I'm pulling data from Security Scorecard and BitSight to help my organization benchmark themselves against industry peers, to understand exactly how they are perceived externally, as well as data internally. So that's my first point. My second point then, when we move into it, is we can use data analytics to adapt our plans as risk change. And our data analytics should help us to continuously monitor leading indicators in an ever-changing risk landscape, right? That's the panacea, I feel, for data analytics. And people often overlook the power of data analytics when it comes to risk management and tend to focus on the controls assurance or the controls monitoring piece. But I think this is a great place to start, actually, instead of just thinking about controls. Because what we're doing then is collecting lots of data, for example, that I've got on the left here. What you should be able to do then is to measure that data, build metrics on top of that data. Metrics traditionally being referred to as key performance indicators, key risk indicators, or key control indicators. So if you're able to run a data analytics program to collect some data and analyze some data, you should then be able to define what do I want to measure within that data that can be used as a leading indicator for risk. You can then use that leading indicator to actually automate, through defining some tolerance levels, a risk assessment. So you're reflecting what's actually happening in terms of risk exposure in the organization today. And again, I said, let's have a look at a practical example for each of these. I'm going to swap into my Diligent platform again. And this time we're looking at a strategic risk profile. So every item within these different buckets represents a strategic risk that is threatening the achievement of my organization's strategic objectives. If I drill down into one of these risks as an example, right, a generic risk here, the failure of critical IT systems, you'll see against that risk, I can actually define multiple leading indicators that we might want to use to monitor our risk exposure in this area. Each of these leading indicators, if we drill down to view the data underneath, is just a performance indicator or a measure on top of some data analytics that I was running, in this case, collecting information about vulnerabilities from a vulnerability scanning tool that my IT team was using. With these metrics then, what I can do is make them even more useful by setting those tolerance levels. So I can move to my assessment area here. I can move, for example, away from just rating a risk from low to critical, to actually defining an automated risk assessment. And what I'm doing is selecting the metric I want to rely on for a particular risk factor assessment within here, setting some simple thresholds against that metric, so that I can start to continuously monitor risk exposure. So as this metric changes over time, the level of risk will change. We could notify that, we could, eyeball it and monitor it. But what I'm now doing is making sure that I can move at the speed of risk. We can change our plans as risk changes within our organization. As this metric increases, the level of risk may also increase, and therefore I know that I need to change my plan. I need to focus my attention here instead of somewhere else I may need to move resources to deliver more assurance to my business in this area. So moving away from that annual, monthly risk assessment process to continuously monitoring risk using leading indicators driven from our data analytics program. Let's look at the next item that we can talk about today, which is how we start to continuously deliver assurance against that risk. So we can use data analytics to continuously monitor control effectiveness, and then that can actually help us then to report on assurance in real time at an aggregate level. So of course, we want to move away from those manual control assessments and control testing, and I'm sure you've heard this all 1,000 times, to relying on modern methods and data analytics tools to allow us to continuously monitor controls. And again, like we were doing with risks, we want to define thresholds against those metric ranges so that we can define when a metric at this level, then the control is deemed effective. When the metric is below this level, the control is not effective, for example, which means that we can start to get notified, exactly as I said with risk, when a control starts to fail and start to take corrective action very quickly. Again, let's look at a practical example of where we've implemented that before. Moving back to the Diligent platform, you'll see here that I'm looking at, this is where we monitor controls in the Diligent platform, but that's not too important. What I'm looking at is my systems access management process. I'm looking at a control around deprovisioning user access for terminated employees, which basically means making sure when people leave our organization, they no longer have access to our core systems or our systems overall, right? We've turned off their user accounts. Against this control then, you'll see if I scroll down that I've got a data analytic associated to it. This time we're looking at combining data sources. I'm looking at monitoring the completion of a process. So I'm looking at for people that have a leaving date in our HR system, for example. It's a simple example. People leaving date in our HR system compared to active user accounts in Active Directory or Okta or whatever you're using. So of course, as part of my data analytics program, I have all of those exceptions in a data table. You could have them in Excel. Obviously, I've got them in the Diligent platform, which is storing that information for me. On top of that data analytic then, on top of all of those exceptions, I've defined some metrics, right? Again, we saw this against risk earlier. So how many of those exceptions exist over the course of a year, for example, or monitoring more of a performance indicator? What's the average time it takes for an employee to get a leaving date and for their user account to be deprovisioned? And again, what we can do then is use those metrics to start to continuously monitor the performance of this control in this instance of my organization. So for example, I can select the metric that I want to use, and then I can start to define the acceptable levels of performance. If it's greater than, for example, 2 days, or if it's, it should be the other way around. If it's less than 2 days, then we deem the control is being performed effectively. If it's greater than or equal to 2 days, then we deem that the control is not operating effectively. So now again, I've moved away from testing a control maybe, once a year or even longer, depending on when it falls into our audit plan, to continuously monitoring this control on a daily, hourly, every 10-minute basis. So when this control fails, we can notify the control owner and they can take corrective action. But the other point I wanted to mention is that this should be deliver more value when you add it all together. So if we are automating the monitoring of multiple controls to start with, we should be able to look at that in aggregate. So if I move back then to my strategic risk that we looked at the top of my presentation, this time I'm going to move to assurance. So now, if we are continuously monitoring whether our controls are effective using data analytics, we should now be able to tell the business every day how much assurance do they have that the risks they're worried about are being treated and mitigated by well-designed and effective controls. So again, instead of delivering those assurances on a quarterly basis to the risk committee, the audit committee, to the board, to senior stakeholders, we can now use the power of data analytics to present a continuous view of assurance within the business. And in a similar way, then, we can start to help the business continuously monitor risk exposure. So if we are continuously monitoring risk through the use of metrics, which are measuring the results of our data analytics program, we can start to present to the business on a continuous basis what is most risky, where is risk exposure. So for example, here I'm looking at the strategic objectives of my organization on the left. I'm looking at the different departments or pieces of my organization along the top. And now I'm continuously presenting a view of where is the aggregation of risk as it relates to my organization's strategic objectives. Where do I need to spend my time, focus my attention, focus my resources to ensure that we understand where is risk within our business, and do we have assurance that that risk is being treated and mitigated by well-defined and effective business processes underpinned by well-designed and effective controls. So I'm going to pause there and ask for questions if there are any. I'm going to stop sharing my screen quickly so I can see those questions.
I don't think we have any come in just yet. I checked a bit earlier, but that's really interesting, Tom, and I think it highlights also that there's almost like a spectrum in terms of the level of automation that you want to or can use and leverage with these data analytics. So at one extreme, it can be fully automated in terms of you're gathering the information, the right source of information from the relevant sources of record, to inform on your risk controls and applying some logic to that. It's kind of like a very binary yes or no answer. It doesn't require that human intervention, that interpretation of the data. Whereas at the other end, you could have the data analytics still providing the relevant information, but there is that interpretation that's still required. And you want that interpretation that somebody can determine, is this control operating effectively or not? And you still want somebody to give you that insight as well. I guess the second one, for any football fans in the audience, it sounds a little bit like the video assistant referee. But it's nice to see this is probably a little more robust than that. Don't open that kind of worms. I'm not a Liverpool fan, by the way, either.
I'd argue we do deliver even more assurance than VAR in this approach, than VAR in this approach, because there's actually, when we talk to people about these programs and these data-driven GRC programs, there's actually 3 types of assurance you should be thinking about, or data collection you should be thinking about. Absolutely, the opinion of the professional practitioner still has a massive role to play, as you said, Mark, in this, right? Your on-field referee, as it were. I'm going to run out of people to talk about in this.
The analogy can take it so far, can't it?
Absolutely. Making those informed conclusions. The second area that we haven't really spoken about today is automating the collection of human data. Some people would call it crowdsourcing. Some people would call it relying on informed people in your business, a bit like your video assistant referee. And that is where we might be asking control performers, for example, to tell us on a continuous basis, do you think this control is working? Were you able to perform it this week? So that we're getting that different insight into it. On a risk basis, that might be automating risk management or risk assessment workshops. So actually asking relevant stakeholders with a stake in that risk to comment, vote, and agree on what they think the level of risk exposure is in the business. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the ultimate assurance, right? Or what should be the ultimate assurance. Sorry, Liverpool fans, the assistant to the assistant video assistant referee, right? Which is your data analytics. That's your fallback option, right? Continuously monitoring when no one is looking to give you that assurance. So it's actually those three aspects that most of our organizations, most of our customers use, rather than just saying, let's just implement a data analytics program, right? It's always part of a wider whole, a wider program.
And which of those options do you see your customers using most widely at the moment? And it's the second one sounds like it's probably that's more recent. It's something that people will look to leverage, but it's probably going to be the first and the third options more frequently, I gather.
There's two kind of points on that. It depends firstly on their appetite for the data analytics piece. So we do have a lot of customers that are ready to use data analytics to start with, and they'll absolutely go headfirst into automating as much as possible. The pressures on their team force them to do that. They're being asked to cover an ever-expanding scope across an ever-changing organization in an ever-changing risk landscape. They've got to use technology that's available to them to get their arms around that, deliver value and assurance that the business needs. The second area is a developing area for us, and that's where people are starting to really rely on control owners and control performers to deliver much more frequent information. Again, for the same reasons, right? But they want to get further. We actually refer to them as the disinterested business user, because that helps us understand what kind of people we're trying to collect data from. You've got to make it easy for them to give you that data. You've got to make it easy for them to get in, get out. Otherwise, they're just not going to adopt it. So we're seeing traditionally, assurance and risk teams focused on the bits that they could control, the assessments by the professional practitioner, and then the data analytics. Loads of the conversations Chris and I are having this year are with organizations that are now starting to say, right, we've got to bring in the business to this discussion. Risk is owned by the business, is not owned by us. We need them involved in this process. Yeah,
absolutely. And when you're talking about, it's the data is the bit that's going to inform on your risks or your controls, and what better people to understand what data they need to tap into than those people that are involved in those very things. Because I guess that's probably one of the biggest challenges, right? Is actually identifying the right data sets to tap into, the right logic to apply to those.
Absolutely right. And I think that when we talk to people about data analytics, the first kind of blocker in their mind is always what's the technical challenge in doing it? How hard is it going to be for me to connect to that data? How hard is it going to be for me to run data analytics against that data? That's actually the easiest bit, right? Like almost every program, every system you're going to implement today is built with an API first strategy. There is no software vendor on the planet that doesn't expect all of their customers to be demanding integrations all of the time. The actual challenge comes from what's your relationship like with the other stakeholders in your business. One, can you understand where that data is? Two, can you get through the bureaucratic intricacies of your organization to actually get access to that data? And then number three is the easy bit. Let's connect to it. Let's pull it out. Let's run analytics against it. Let's do some metrics. Designing the metric itself, the bit that you're going to measure, what should I measure, is where you need some serious risk and compliance chops to design something super useful.
And just very quickly, because we're almost out of time, but in terms of thinking people who might be listening to this and thinking about a strategy, how do they get started with this? You talked about the pressures that some teams have got on making use of data as much as possible, but there is a danger of going too big too soon, isn't there? And you want to get some quick wins and see how you can gain success and then get ideas for building momentum.
Exactly. Easiest place to start is to start where everybody else starts, right? Every organization has controls over financial reporting. Every organization has NetSuite or Oracle or SAP, and they've got their controls defined. Therefore, rely on what everyone else is doing. Use the work they've already done. We've got packs and templates to help people do that. and get those bits done. Recognize the value from those well understood areas, and then start to think about the less well understood areas when we're talking about IT risk, cyber risk, HR processes, things that you traditionally wouldn't always associate with a data analytics program.
Great. Well, thank you, Tom, Chris. I mean, that's been a fantastic topic to discuss. Unfortunately, we have run out of time now, so we'll have to wind up the session at this point. If anyone would like to discuss any of this further, they do have any questions, but they didn't have time to put them into the chat, please feel free to reach out to us. We can loop the guys from Diligent into that as well, and happy to provide further information that might help guide your own data analytics journey. Thank you again, Chris and Tom, for your contributions, insights to this really informative session, and for the attendees joining us as well today. We hope you enjoy the rest of our Risky Business programme of events over the remaining schedule. So thank you.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.